Hey, how's it going? Hello, this is Mark McPherson, a film critic for filminquiry.com, twincitiesgeek.com, and of course, movieswithmark.com. So we're back for another movie review stream, and we've got quite a bit to cover this week. A lot of stuff's been piling up recently, and this is not even counting all the big festival stuff that's happening right now. There's tons of festival stuff coming out at the moment, so I'm just going to try to cover what we can here. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to be covering the new Clerks film, which Kevin Smith, I believe, has been touring around the country right now. The sequel to, of course, Clerks II from 2006 and first Clerks film from 1994. So a bit of a legacy sequel here. I don't know. It's kind of one of those like narrowly it's a legacy sequel, kind of like with the second Avatar film we got coming out. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the new horror film coming out this weekend, Pearl, from Ty West, which you just saw here with the dorky little thing there. That's the new film from Ty West, which is the prequel / sequel to the film earlier this year called X. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. What else are we talking about? We're going to be talking about Barbarian, another horror film. Which is a pretty wild film, which if you don't know anything about is kind of a good thing. I'm going to try not to spoil it just because this is one of those films where it's like you almost want to come into it cold. So I'm going to try to not spoil much of anything here with it. We'll also be talking about Honk For Jesus, Save Your Soul, which is a religious satire that stars Regina Hall. So I'll be talking about that as well. And we'll also be talking about... What else are we going to talk about? Oh, yeah, we're going to be talking about that Pinocchio film. Yeah, it's a Disney remake, and it's Robert Zemeckis. So if you can do the math, you probably already know where that's going. But we'll save that disappointment for last. Let's talk about the big one this week. The one we absolutely have to talk about. Because it's coming out this weekend. And you got to get it fresh in your mind. All right. So I'm going to get my notes up here and get a drink. Oh, what a film. Oh, man. Got some things to say about this one. All right. So let's get into the groove here. And 3, 2, 1. So Pearl is the prequel, or sequel, if you want to think of it that way, to Ty West's film X. Now, you might remember earlier this year we had a great little horror film come out from Ty West, who hadn't had any new horror films come out in quite some time, and X was just a brilliant throwback slasher type film that was evocative of like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was also very, very weighty. Like it had like a lot of great disturbing sequences and a lot of great kills. But also had a great theme about like the passage of time, the dwindling nature of youth, sexual desires that are repressed. So there was a whole lot going on in that film that I absolutely loved. So now we get Pearl, and Pearl we were actually teased. We actually had this film teased at the end of X, because usually you don't expect like mid-credit sequences from like A24 films. But then, like surprisingly enough, like we got through the credits, then here's a quick little advertisement for Pearl, which it takes place before the events of X. And it already had footage and everything, so it's like, oh man, they shot this recently. And as it turns out, as I found out later, it turns out, yeah, Ty West actually made this around the same time as X. I believe they said like he wrote like the screenplay within like 2 weeks, and then went into production really quick to explore more of the character of Pearl. Now, here's the thing. This is a prequel, but you do not need any knowledge, like, and Ty West has mentioned, but you do not need any foreknowledge of X. It kind of adds to it, but there's no like little like in jokes or stuff like that you have to understand what's going on in Pearl, which is great because Pearl actually stands well enough on its own as not just trying to replicate the same style as X. It feels like a much different film in a variety of ways. Like, we'll start off with like the obvious thing here is that it goes for, instead of going for the 70s like kind of like grindhouse format It was all like gritty, kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This story is meant to take place during 1918, and they kind of film it to be more like classic Hollywood. Like they have like like the opening credits would have that kind of familiar typography. They use a lot of like kind of like wipes and like circle ins that you would see in like classic films. The settings were just picturesque and like beautiful and gorgeous, and even the soundtrack has this kind of like classic quality of like that kind of like lingering orchestra that you would get in like a lot of like very like classic Hollywood type films. So it's definitely got like a very distinct look here, and it was really cool to see Mia Goth return as Pearl. She played both Pearl and Maxine in the first film X, you might remember. So she played both a young person and an old person. So it's kind of interesting. You get to see her play an older version of this character and then show the younger version of herself as well. And she dominates that film. Like if she was like an amazing surprise in X, she's the dominant force here in Pearl. And I think that's because she's given a lot to work with here, but also because she has to carry the story. Like the whole deal is that Pearl starts off as like like this innocent woman who just has great dreams and she wants to be a star. Like one way to like refer to this film is it's almost kind of like the anti-version of A Star Is Born, where this woman has great dreams of becoming an actress and making it big, and then having them dashed away and just having them like eat her up. It's like it's interesting. It's kind of like if A Star Is Born was like the opposite, where her dreams didn't come true and she just went on like a killing rampage. Which to a degree you can kind of understand, because Pearl's life sucks. She lives on a farm where her husband is off at war and she suspects that he's died. She lives with a mother who's very strict about running her farm. She doesn't like allow Pearl to have any fun at all. Her father's catatonic, so she has to care for him at all times. And all pleasures feel like they're denied her, and this boils over it boils over like immediately. You see this frustration in her eyes, and with how she like goes into these dream sequences, and also with how she just kills the farm animals for fun, which is a very telling sign. Like you immediately see like this is going down a dark path, despite the kind of like almost kind of like dreamy, whimsical nature that like the first half of this film has. There's little like pepperings of like, here's some little aspects of like how she's not well and how she's gonna go on like a murderous streak here. So it's like I said, it's very much like the classic Hollywood stuff, but then juxtaposing it with disturbing scenes of violence, but also like sexual desires. Like there's at one point, I'll just say this, there's a scene that takes place in a cornfield with a scarecrow, and I'll just let you put two into it. She's in the field, she has a scarecrow, and she's very, very lonely. I'll let your mind fill in the blanks about what happens. I feel like it might happen just because there's like a lot of surprises here, but also like just a lot of like great performances here. Like I really liked David Cornsweet as the projectionist that Pearl falls in love with. Like she has this love with film, and it feels like this projectionist is kind of going to be like her ticket into like another world and showing her a different side that both intrigues her and terrifies her at the same time. So it's very interesting to see her kind of like pursue this relationship. And then you also have Tandy Wright, who plays Ruth, who's basically the competition. Like she's everything that Pearl wants to be. She has a better life. She's a little bit, from the way that she's staged, she's a lot more beautiful. She's blonde. She essentially has everything that like a movie producer would be looking for. And so Pearl just kind of longs for this life, and she makes all these steps to kind of like make it happen, but also breaks a lot of rules and breaks a lot of limbs and burns a lot of people and chops a lot of people up and feeds them to the gator. Like you may remember in X, they had a gator that ate people, and that gator's still around, still eating people. And I was surprised at just how gorgeous this film looks, and kind of like how it leans into its own style. Like at first, you can see it's definitely taking that classic cinema aesthetic, but the further it goes, it sort of develops a little bit of a style all its own. That by the time we get closer to the end of the film, like, it takes some really interesting choices. Like, we get this kind of like mirrored, like almost kind of like kaleidoscopic variation of shots where she's basically chopping people up and kind of like staging dinner with corpses and just going down these really dark paths, and staging it with this kind of like this eerie nature, that kind of like, it's weird. Like, the music has this great ability to transition between like this kind of like odd joyous whimsy to intensity, and that's very much present by like the ending shot where just Pearl stares you directly in the eyes with a smile that kind of like cracks and breaks as she holds it for the remainder of the credits. I guess where the film, like, and I know that like you're obviously going to want to compare it to, like, to X. How does it stack up next to X? Because that was a great film, and I would say that it's not better than X, and I think that's mostly because X has so much going on that there's a lot to like latch onto in that film and explore, in terms of like the themes that are presented. Within Pearl, it feels like a much simpler story. Like, there's not like a bigger focus on like like this longing. I mean, like, Pearl's longing is the thing that drives this film, but there's not a lot of like whole other. We don't explore much of like the other characters. Like, a lot of the other characters are mostly just obstacles for Pearl, which I think is fine. Like, I think the key thing that needs to be stressed here is that X, X is its own film, and Pearl is very much its own film. It's very distinct. So you're kind of going to have to almost kind of like chop away like the distinction, like not be looking for like everything with an X, I think, to fully appreciate it. And to that degree, I would almost say, like, if you haven't seen X, you feel free to just go see Pearl first if you want. It might actually be interesting just to see what it'd be like to watch Pearl first and then to go watch X if you haven't seen it already. In either case, great double feature. I hope that the theaters start doing more double features with it. And just like, I can't stress this enough. Mia Goth's performance here is just like, it's the definite high point of the film. Like, there's a great monologue by Mia Goth as Pearl where basically she just unloads all the stuff that wasn't said before in this very like tearful, uneasy way that just your eyes are locked on the screen. You cannot take your eyes off her. Especially because that scene ends with her chasing someone down with an axe and killing them in a rather long shot that kind of like goes out of the farm and kind of follows them in this somewhat brief foot chase where she's basically taking her time while her victim is just terrified that this woman in a dress is coming after her with an axe, which I gotta admit, Mia Goth looks amazing in that scene. Just coming out there with like a red dress and an axe and just hacking down this person who she feels has just kind of like ruined her entire life. It's just intense and just pitch perfect horror there. So yeah, like, I really enjoy this film. It's not as great as X, because like I said, X has like, heavier themes to balance here, and it feels like Pearl is taking on just enough to make it work as a character study. Because apparently, like Wes said, this is, even if we don't make this film, at least we have like a decent character study, so we understand Pearl more. And I'm glad actually that this film got approved, so that now we can essentially have a trilogy. Like, as much like with X, they did announce at the end of this film there is a third part, and apparently it's going to take place in the 80s and follow more of Maxine, so that'll be interesting. At any rate, you're getting more of Mia Goth. This is her trilogy now, especially since she co-wrote this film in particular. So yeah, Pearl is as like a horror character study with trying to, having this juxtaposed nature of like classic Hollywood and just grotesque horror. It really works, and it becomes its own film where it doesn't feel like it's just trying to replicate X, which is absolutely beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful film. There's no two ways around it. So Pearl, I believe, will be having a wide release this weekend. I think it's an A24 film, so aside from like Everything Everywhere All at Once, It's probably not going to do the biggest business. It'll probably do pretty good, and I think it's mostly going to be because, like with everything everywhere all at once, a lot of word of mouth. So I'm doing my part here to make sure that this A24 horror film gets a lot more eyes on it, and hopefully it does. I'm sure like a lot of people will be talking about it, especially people who are big fans of X and saying like, "Oh, you got to see this." It's a continuing horror saga. Great horror film from A24 from Ty West. What more would you like? That's the good stuff. All right, going from one horror film to another here. Let me get some water. Sorry, just swallowing that there. So yeah, we're getting a lot of horror films earlier this year, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of like the Christmas season. The Christmas season starts a little bit earlier and earlier every year, and so Halloween season starts a little bit earlier and earlier. So we get Pearl and Barbarian, and of course, it's just the studios trying to get out the scary films before the big, bigger studios come in. I should also mention too. I also got this, since I was already showing this little weird thing. They also have these like cute little pearl. What do you call it? Bandanas, handkerchiefs, I guess, something like that. It's a cute little thing. Just like even if the film sucked, it'd be nice just to have this, just because it has the A24 logo on it. But the fact that Pearl's actually awesome makes this so much cooler. It's always great when you get little fun stuff like that, and the film is actually great, so you don't mind wearing it, even though you might wear it for a while. Like the first bit of movie merch, I'll just tell the story a little quick. The first bit of movie merch that I ever got was for this Ashton Kutcher movie called Spread. It was terrible. Nobody saw this film, but I had like an Ashton Kutcher movie shirt that I wore for a while that just said Spread on it. And thankfully, no one had ever heard of it, too, so it just said Spread. It's a conversation starter, Okay, let's get to Barbarian. Another horror film, which was also written and directed by the same person. By a comedy actor, no less. So, between him and Jordan Peele, go to comedy people for horror. They know what to do. All right, let me get the notes up here. Alrighty. Whew. And 3, 2, 1. So, Barbarian is a horror film that takes place in a house with a creepy basement with some creepy things inside. Here's the thing about Barbarian. It's a great subversion for people who want to peg down what they think a horror film is. So in other words, like, if you've been on YouTube, you've probably seen like those videos where they say like, oh, here's the hidden meaning behind what this film is truly saying and what it's all about. And a lot of films are like that now, where they do have a central theme, and there's usually one defining scene that reveals everything, that lets you know what this film is about. It's kind of like, I think director Nicholas Winding Refn once said that, like, every film has that one moment where it defines what it is about. And I think a lot of like high-minded horror does have this aspect where you're kind of like searching for like the central core theme of what this film is about. So like you watch something like The Babadook and you're like, oh, okay, this is about grief. And then you look at, Jordan Peele's Get Out and you're like, oh, okay, this is about, racial inequality. And Barbarian, I think, is a great film because it doesn't give you the easy answer here. It sets it up where your mind is basically searching like, okay, what is this connecting to? Okay, I think I know what this is about. I think I see where this is going. And the moment you think you do, the exact moment that you think you have this film pegged down and you can predict everything that will follow, it just flips the board and changes it completely. Now, I know for a lot of people, they're going to find that frustrating. They're going to find it frustrating that, this horror film is just subverting a lot of tropes and kind of like throwing them at the screen and never giving anyone a clear thematic path for what it's trying to do. But that, I think, is what I love about it so much, and also what makes it so much fun. Because here's the thing: this film, if you haven't heard of Barbarian, it was directed by Zach Krieger. And if that name doesn't sound familiar, it's because if it doesn't sound familiar, it's because he was one of the members of the comedy troupe The Whitest Kids You Know. If you've never seen one of the skits from The Whitest Kids You Know, look them up sometime. Everything from like the popcorn sketch to the gallon of PCP. There's so many fun little skits from there. Absolutely hilarious. So the fact that he's making this horror film that he directed and wrote means that he has a pretty good mastery of how to like temper your expectations and play up on the absurdity. I was talking about this too, like, it kind of relates to how like Jordan Peele, who was once greatly known for a lot of humorous roles and just being a great comedic actor, and here he is making stuff like Get Out and Us and Nope, just great horror films. Zach is doing the same thing here. But he turns it on its head, and I love the way that he does it. So the film starts out in Detroit, where Tess, played by Georgina Campbell, has come to stay at an Airbnb while she's in town for a interview. The only problem is she gets to the Airbnb while someone has already booked it. And that person is Keith, played by Bill Skarsgård. And Keith, like, the moment this happens, like, Keith realizes, like, oh, I know how this looks. She's gonna think that I'm squatting here, or that I have some sinister plan to like get her trapped here. So immediate, like, here's the thing, like, not only is Keith thinking this, but we're thinking it. The audience is thinking, oh, okay, something's wrong here. Tess had this Airbnb, someone else is in it. What is the deal here? But I love that after that point, most of the rest of that night is basically just Keith and Tess trying to like connect with each other, and Keith assuring her, no, look, I'm on the up and up. Here's my reservation. It's just a mix-up. I'm not doing anything sinister. I'm not trying to drug you or anything. You can sleep in any room you want. I'll keep my distance. I won't do anything. I know how this looks. This looks like a setup to a horror film. And indeed, the way that it's directed, there's like an underlying creepiness where you think, oh man, maybe there is something lurking here. And then just when you think there is, there isn't. But then Tess goes down to the basement and discovers a secret room hidden behind a wall. And here's where things kind of get great. So in the same way that like Jordan Peele's Nope has that moment where like a horror protagonist disengages from the story, where they see something scary, they're familiar with horror tropes, and they just basically say, no, I'm not going to do this. And the moment that happens, like the same way that it did in Jordan Peele's Nope, everyone laughs. Great big laugh. You reveal like the secret hallway that's dark and scary, and it's behind this stone wall, and she just says, nope. Everyone laughs. Very funny. But then you think, okay, so what happens next? So you have to do something at that point if a character refuses to do something. And in Jordan Peele's Nope, it worked really well because the entity itself that wants to kill them basically demands like entertainment. It's basically like the stand-in for the audience, because a character could say, well, no, I'm not going to do this, and then the audience would get angry, because then what would happen? Nothing would happen. So then at that point, Zach basically has to find some way to get this woman into this dark hallway so that more scary stuff can happen. So essentially, the way that this happens is that the door will lock for no reason. Like, they never fully explain how this door locks. It just does. And so she has to go down this hallway. She doesn't have to. She could just sit there and wait, for Keith to come back, or try to find some way to open up the window, but she ends up going to the dark hallway. And that's what I love so much about this film. Like, I won't reveal too much going past this point, just because there's so much surprising stuff that happens, but the film just keeps mounting all these scary moments. And rather than trying to find the perfect way to stage them, because like a lot of like horror audiences that are expecting this now, where they want very high-minded horror, where there's more of like a calculative and intelligent reason for characters to do the things that will get them into the scary spot. Because you'll hear this a lot anytime somebody watches like a typical Blumhouse film or something like that. Characters will do stupid things just so that they can get to the scary stuff, because that's ultimately what we want. We want to get to the scary stuff but we also want, to make it feel a little bit plausible why someone would be thrown into this situation. And Zach's approach is basically, no, you know what, screw it. I'm just gonna throw them in there. And there's something a bit refreshing about that, where he's just pushing these characters into these scary situations. And from there, from what they find in the basement, so much wild and weird stuff happens, and there's just subversion at every point in the film. Like you think, and like I said, you think you know what's going on, and then it'll flip on its head, and you won't understand it. Like at one point when we get further into the basement, we see like cages and stuff like that. I mean, like, oh, okay, is this some underground slavery operation? And then you like get an idea where you think, oh, okay, maybe it's some like underground cult or something like that. And then it immediately switches it up to like Justin Long's character, who plays this disgraced actor who's accused of like sexual allegations, who's basically like a huge representation of like toxic masculinity. She was thinking, oh, okay, so this film seems like it might be leading towards like aspects of masculinity. But then, just when you think that's what the film's about, it shifts again into focusing on a desperation for like family love. But then, just when you think it's about that, it turns into another film where it skips ahead in like a non-linear format, to a greater film about just the sinister nature of suburbia. So there's all these compounding themes that keep subverting themselves, because they never quite play out the way that you expect, or maybe even that you want to as well. It's also very clever, I think, in how the film stages its violence and its grotesque nature, because there's some pretty violent and gross stuff that happens in this film. Suffice to say, there are some scenes where people get their heads crushed in, and there are some scenes that involve nipples. I'll leave it at that. But I feel like it uses just enough of it where like you just get enough of like the grotesque money shots before it moves on to the next like little creepy thing that happens here. So it almost kind of has like this kind of like throwback nature to like someone who like I don't quite want to say it's like like the the video nasties of yesteryear, where it was just kind of like finding gross stuff to happen in a horror film just for the heck of it. But because like definitely there are some overarching themes here, but there's also just this very playful nature with it, where it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's got this great absurdity to it, where it recognizes how to use like tonal whiplash to sort of like blindside the audience. Like the moment that you're introduced to Justin Long's character, like the moment that happens, like there was like an eruption of laughter across the audience, because you do not expect the film to transition from where it was to this scene that seems more vibrant and alive and excited, and colorful as opposed to like the darkness. So yeah, this film is a lot of fun to see with a crowd, just to see how they react. And I think like a lot of the audiences were just kind of, the audience was like, they thought this was a hoot. They were kind of like blindsided by this, trying to figure out what was happening. And I love that feeling of it, like having the audience just being like kind of like blown away by it. Like there are times where like audiences will feel overwhelmed just because they didn't quite process like all the themes. Like I've walked out of like films like Nope and Everything Everywhere All at Once, where they always have the same reaction, which is like, wow, that's a lot to process and I gotta think about this. Whereas when they came out of Barbarian, and they're just like, oh, that's a lot of crazy stuff. That there's a lot of bizarre and crazy stuff here, and just and cleverly written. I will say this though, if you're not the biggest fan of horror tropes, and you, like if it really aggravates you when like characters do like really silly things, like go into the dark hallway and call out for people, and go searching for people who have gone missing, even though you're like, they're in a dark basement, I don't know if I want to go down there. You're probably going to get aggravated at this film. And you could sense like some aggravation in the crowd as well, which is kind of great. Like I love going to horror films where there is that kind of visceral reaction that people have to it. And usually I kind of expect that aggravation with like films from like Blumhouse where characters will do stupid things and people will like shout back at the screen, or they'll go like, oh, why'd they do that? But then to also have that compounded with like laughter and just like and people just going like, what is happening, what's going on, and just being blindsided the whole time was so much fun. It's such a fun experience. Like, I know I say this with like a lot of horror films that you gotta see with the crowd. I think that's like for most horror films that's like a given. Like I mentioned with like Pearl's a great film to see with the crowd just because it's a lot of fun just to see how intense everything builds and mounts. But Barbarian is a lot of fun to see with the crowd just because they will have no idea what to expect. And especially like if they're like a very astute audience, like they're very like, very, very like astute on horror, and like they think they understand where a horror film is going, like like within the first 20 minutes they're like, oh, okay, I figured this film out, I know where it's going. Barbarian is like the biggest middle finger to that audience to say, no, you do not understand what is happening in this film, and there is no way you can predict how this is going to end, which is great. I love that very refreshing, unexpected nature to a film like this, and especially a film that is willing to embrace this kind of absurdity that that it feels like you could only get this out of like a B movie, and here it is in like this great little wide release horror film by one of the whitest kids and it's a lot of fun, an absolute hoot. What a film. Hey, sucked, how's it going? Barbarian was great in terms of how it unravels its message step by step, and how it finally explains who the actual Barbarian is under the crushing grip of the unaware abuse in the forms of sexual assault. Yeah. And the thing is, like, it never makes it, it never, like, settles on that as well. Like, I love, like, the nonlinear nature, how it feels like it also, like, too, with, like, how it has varying shooting styles, between, like, kind of like the three-ish characters involved in the story. It almost feels like it'd have like an anthology format to it, or even like a there's gonna be drawn back, but like a 21 grams type of story that kind of like goes all over the place. But surprisingly, no, it keeps switching things up. Like the whole like the sequence, I believe, was like 1980 compared to like the present. It has like a much different shooting style. I believe they use like kind of like what's it? It's not quite like the fisheye lens. It's like the kind of like what's it? It's like the long focal lens that they use. Just basically a very creepy lens, just everywhere they were shooting. Yeah, like like there's a lot going on here, like the gentrification, the housing market. There's so much stuff I forgot to mention too, like the police response, like how the police basically do nothing here. There is a lot of stuff happening in this film, and it explores just enough of it. Almost like a first film and sequel in one, just unlike something else. Which is great too. Like it feels like there's like 3 whole films here, and here they are just kind of like combined, but also like trimmed of like the expected. Like you expected there are probably gonna be like. You almost get the idea that it's going to be like a slow burn horror with like the first section with like Tess and Keith. You think that's what it's going to be like. It's just going to be like haunted house type frights and stuff like that. But then they're like, no, here's some other scary and frightening stuff. So Barbarian is playing in theaters right now. I believe it came out last weekend. And I think it's doing pretty good. I think it's definitely going to be polarizing, I think, for some audiences. I know a few people who were coming out of it going like, it did all the same horror stuff and all the tropes and all the stuff like that. Neglecting that it's actually playing around with them. Alright. So, let's talk about Clerks III. The other film that's kinda sorta opening this week. I believe it had like its first like live screening events the beginning of this week. I think it was like Tuesday that they started releasing these. Okay. So let me get my notes up here. And here we go. And we'll talk about the new Kevin Smith film. All right. Let me get situated here. Whew. All right. All right. So 3, 2, 1. So Clerks III is the third Clerks film from Kevin Smith. So how does this latest Clerks film stack up toward against like the other Clerks films? And I think right out of the gate, I'll say that it's definitely not as funny as the previous two films. Like it felt like within Clerks had like so many great. The first Clerks had so many great funny lines, and like tapping into a little bit of like the slacker nature as well as the pop culture geekiness of just like hanging out and talking about Star Wars and bickering over stuff like Death Star toilets and all that. And then Clerks 2 was, a little bit, more commercial. Like it wanted to do more lowbrow stuff like the Donkey Show, but it still had like a few decent lines in there. Like, there's the great exchange about Lord of the Rings, which is pretty funny. So there, and I never really felt like there was a moment like that in Clerks 3. But here's the thing. With Clerks 3, it's a little bit of a trade-off here. It's definitely the least funny Clerks film, but it's also, I think, one of like the more heartfelt ones. Because like it's definitely tapping into something to something more with these characters. And by something more, I basically mean a midlife crisis. Because let's say it's been like almost 30 years since the first Clerks film. And these are much older actors. They're definitely going to have to be doing more than just retail at this point. Like, even in Clerks 2, like, they're kind of just like, man, you guys are still working retail here. But I do like how they expand on the characters in that way. So even though we don't really get much of a comedy, we at least get a little bit of, like, a heartfelt and meaningful drama. If you have a lot of affinity for Clerks, if you really love the writing of Kevin Smith and like the films that he makes and the characters that he's created, this is definitely like kind of like an ode, a very heartfelt, and also like a little bit of like a nostalgic trip for fans who've grown up with these characters and really love them and want to see them have like a proper ending to their story. So it picks up where like Clerks 2 left off, more or less. Like, we've had like, how long has it been since Clerks 2? It's been at least like almost like a decade and a half, I think it's been since Clerks 2. But at the end of Clerks 2, Dante Hicks and Randall Graves now own the Quick Stop convenience store. So, of course, they're reprised the same actors, Brian O'Halloran playing Dante and Jeff Anderson playing Randall. And they own the Quick Stop now, so now their problems aren't so much about, managing their shifts or, not being here today, so I'm not going to have that line again. Or at least they shouldn't have that line again. So now they have new concerns, now that they're managers. And their latest concern is health. Because let's face it, they're getting older, they're middle-aged, and health becomes a concern when Randall has a heart attack. And it's treated like with a little bit of humor, but mostly kind of like a dramatic sense of like, realizing that, you're getting older and, you start having a little bit of an existential dread, when health issues come up, like having a heart attack. You start questioning, what have I done with my life? And so in between, like, having, some funny dialogue with Amy Sedaris as a doctor and Justin Long as a surgeon, which I have no idea what type of accent Justin Long is trying to do in this film. I would have to rewatch it just to remember what type of accent he was doing, but it felt off for the actor. But at any rate, Randall realizes he's got to do something with his life, and he decides, well, I worked in a video store, I watched a lot of movies, why don't I just make a movie? And what could he make a movie on? Well, the one thing he knows best, his own life. You would think Star Wars, but apparently they bring it up like they probably can't do much with Star Wars since Disney might come down on them, which kind of feels like a big kneecap for this film. It feels like it can't tap so much into having like commentary on pop culture. At least it feels that way, because the thing is, most of the film is just the filming of the first Clerks film. It's basically Randall saying, "Hey, the stuff that happened to us in the first Clerks movie, that'd make a great movie. So why don't we just do that over again with the same actors?" And when you watch this, it's like it feels less like the next entry in like a trilogy closer for Clerks as it does like a greatest hits album, or I guess to be more accurate, it feels like a reunion. It feels like you're watching all these old actors reprise the same roles that they were playing like 28 years ago, which is surreal. You're seeing all like the same familiar scenes from Clerks, and it's just the actors reprising them. And I want to make clear though, it's not like very literal. Like it's not like the entire film is just beat for beat the same scenes as Clerks. Although it does stage quite a bit, and without giving too much away, it does bring back some of the older actors for some surprise cameos, yeah, including like some actors like you might not expect. And there's also a few like guest star cameos, like I mentioned, like Amy Sedaris. But there's a few other a few other actors they wedge in there. Like I'm sure at this point everyone expects like, okay, Ben Affleck is going to be in there, and I will say that this was probably like the weakest Ben Affleck cameo. They really don't have much for do. It feels very much like the cameo scene they gave him was just kind of like a wing it scene, because there's this whole sequence where it feels like it's just giving the actors time to just wing it, just have fun. And to some degree, you kind of get it what Smith is doing here. He just wants to like hang out and just kind of like play with all these familiar actors and just give them fun stuff to do. At the same time, though, it almost kind of feels like just rewatching Clerks with the director's commentary track, because we get a lot of like Kevin Smith playing, reprising his role as Silent Bob, he basically serves as the cinematographer. And he basically says all the stuff that he said about Clerks for years. Like, oh, we got to shoot it in black and white. That way we can shoot at night. And, like the colors in here are horrible. And he does this for like a few scenes, but then like Jeff Anderson since he's the director of this little project, he handles most of the other lines, like, oh, maybe we could, kill off Dante in the end, but what if we want a sequel? Sequels are hacky. So there's a lot of nostalgic winking here, where if you're not a big Kevin Smith fan, you're probably, if you're not the big Kevin Smith fan, you're probably either going to find this stuff annoying, if you're already aware of this, or you're kind of going to be scratching your head like, okay, wait, who is this character? Why are they talking about Chuli's gum? And why are there all these references to like Ranger Danger and like Happy Scrappy Hero Pup? All these little references to like the first Clerks film. So you really, like I really have to stress this, you really have to be into the first Clerks film to really appreciate this. Not just for like the comedy that's going on here, but for the nostalgic nature here, because it's very much a sense where Dante and Randall are having this midlife crisis, where they want to essentially go back, because like the future just looks kind of bleak for them, especially for Dante. Dante like very much has like a lot of like trauma that he's dealing with a recent loss in his life, and it leads to actually, I think, probably Brian O'Halloran's like finest performances in all of Clerks. He has probably one of the best monologues he's ever given. He has a lot more range here, where like he basically breaks down into like a sobbing mess here. You get to see more than just like the standard blustering and flustering that you get with him in like every Clerks film. That being said, if you like little moments like having him argue with Randall, there are a few small but funny little moments here and there, where you get that kind of like that old magic is recaptured. Like I do like the fact that Randall is trying to argue that Dante is not like the Han Solo of the Star Wars story. He tries to argue that he's like Dak from The Empire Strikes Back, and then Dante's like, I'm Dak, and he's got to like, you can pretty much trace itself from there. And of course, yes, you have Jason Mewes returning as Jay, teaming up with Silent Bob again. I did find it interesting that Jay and Silent Bob now run like a marijuana dispensary, but it feels like there's not a lot done with them, and it also feels like they're very much in the same camp as Dante and Randall, but not a whole lot is explored with that either. It just kind of feels like, yeah, they have a longing for the past as well. Because now, yeah, they have their own store for selling weed, so they can't do like, street deals anymore, but they still wanna. They're like, like there's no reason for them to. They just want to say like, hey, this is how we did it back in the day. So there's clearly like a lot of like nostalgia and longing and midlife crises that are going on in Clerks 3. And to some degree, like you kind of sympathize with it, that you almost kind of wish that it would lean into it further instead of just kind of like, relying on like the familiar comedic bits from the past film. I will say this: the one the funniest character I think with the most interesting arc is definitely Elias. Elias, played by Trevor Furman, he returns from Clerks 2. You might remember he was the employee who was kind of like a sheltered Christian. And here it's interesting because like he basically loses his faith and becomes a Satanist. So you have a great running joke where anytime Elias is in a scene, he has like a different kind of like Satanist goth-like outfit on. And it changes like radically with each scene, where it's just like it's so much fun. Like and they rarely address it too. Like there'll be a few times where Randall will be like, oh cool, you got kind of a Blade Runner gimmick going there. But for the most time, it's never addressed. It's just a running visual gag that I think works really well. So Elias actually becomes a lot of fun in that aspect. I didn't really like, though, how Elias's whole subplot involves a cryptocurrency and how that cryptocurrency saves the day. Basically, like, it doesn't quite save the day, but it kind of, like, wraps everything up in a neat little bow, which is kind of gross, but and not like the lowbrow funny way that Smith probably intended. But for the most part, I really did appreciate Elias there, and it was fun to kind of see this character be given a little bit more to do rather than just be the one joke of being a sheltered Christian. Now to have him be a little bit more rebellious and Satanist, it was kind of fun. He was cute. He was the cutest character. Like you can't rely on Jason Mewes to be the cute character all the time. Someone's got to take on that mantle, especially since they really do lay into this thick that, yeah, Elias, and he has like a new friend too. They basically become the new Jay and Silent Bob. It's the next generation, the torch passing. But there's a lot of like, I feel like there's a lot of like wasted potential here too, because like I said, it's not as funny as it can be, and I think that's mostly because it's just trapped in a lot of like the nostalgia being the funny the a lot of like the comedy here, especially like hey, remember when Dante mentioned the number 37 and what that meant in the first film? Yeah, his girlfriend and the 37 guys. So there's a lot of jokes like that, and they're kind of like, you kind of smirk and I was like, okay, yeah, I remember that from the first film, but anything new gonna happen? And unfortunately there isn't. Like, it almost makes me wish that Randall's original script came to light, where it was basically just him rewriting everything so that it was completely different. It almost makes you wish to see that alternative version of Clerks, because like the most we get out of this new version is that Jay can't remember his lines. That's about all the weirdness that we get with like subverting the classic Clerks story. But like I said, there's a lot of missed potential here with like I mentioned that scene where like Randall addresses like Elias and like, oh cool, you got a Blade Runner get up. But then once that line happens, Elias says, oh cool, thanks, what's Blade Runner? And then the joke ends, and it makes you think, wait a minute, it feels like there's a whole other scene here. Wouldn't there be like a great scene where like Randall would have to walk him through what happens in Blade Runner? And then maybe like with his description, it sounds like a little bit inaccurate, where Dante could argue about it, saying that's not what happened in Blade Runner. And Randall could basically get into a big argument about like, the politics of like replicants or how they poop or something like that. Something more like that. Like, like if they really wanted to recapture the classic nature of Clerks and have that kind of like nostalgic twinge back again to kind of like capture that lightning in a bottle, it would feel like you should expand more on stuff like that. And there's so many scenes where it feels like it has that potential, but it's so either trapped in nostalgia or wanting to take itself more seriously with this midlife crisis angle that we don't get a lot of funny scenes like that. So I'm very torn about this film, like, because on one level, I do appreciate the fact that it definitely has a lot of heart towards it. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be as like as it doesn't have a lot of like the cynical edge that the previous Clerks films had. And on that level, I kind of respect the film. On another level, though, it's not as funny as the previous Clerks films, and a lot of it's kind of like pop culture geekiness that it usually relied on is not as present, and what little of it is present just kind of feels a little bit more weak. Like, it's not that it's like cringe inducing or like completely unfunny, but it's just kind of like passing smirks, like knowing smiles, like, okay, I get this reference, I know what they're talking about, I get it. When's the next big joke coming? And you rarely get it here. So it's definitely a trip down memory lane. And if you've never had that many fond memories of Kevin Smith's movies or Clerks, it might not be for you. But if you are a Clerks fan, if you absolutely love Clerks, if you love the characters and you want to see them get some closure, the film is definitely worth watching on that angle. So yeah, Clerks 3. Clerks 3 is currently going through a festival type deal right now. It's weird, like it's basically having like kind of the same thing that Smith did with what was it, like Red State, I think, where he like toured towns. And I believe there's like Fathom events where they're holding screenings. So I believe this week, yeah, they are actually playing Clerks 3 and like a few like event screenings. I think I'll have to check the release here, but I'm pretty sure like it'll expand into a larger release soon. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, it's doing like a roadshow tour that started actually like last week, I think it started. But yeah, it does look like it having some Fathom event screenings through Lionsgate, and I think it's just happening all this week. I don't know if it's going to be getting a wider release. It might be getting a limited release after that into some other theaters, but I don't know, like maybe they're just like waiting for stuff to like cool off or like find the right moment for it, but yeah, so Clerks 3 is playing this week in kind of like a festival format, might be expanding into limited and wide release. Otherwise, it will probably be on like streaming or on home video by Christmas. I'd imagine it'd have to go, I mean, well, hell, it might even be on like a streaming service by like Thanksgiving. Just because like if they're going to have that short of a run for it, just like a week-long run, they're probably going to want to release it on something soon. All right. So now let's get to something a little bit more comedic and a little bit more dark. All right, let's get the notes up here. Okie doke. And this one was actually funny. And this one, I believe, is actually playing in theaters and on Peacock right now. Which is interesting because I think that, like, to the best of my knowledge, Universal is the only studio right now, I think, doing, like, the same day and date release format. Which is kind of great because, like, HBO stopped doing that this year the way that they did previously. But now, looks like some of the films are getting dual releases. Peacock. All right. So, in 3, 2, 1. So, Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul, is a dark religious comedy, which is pretty, like, it's definitely, like, bookended by a very depressing nature of, like, religious zealotry and scandal, which might blindside some audiences. At least I think it did for a few. So, like, I think I should preference it by saying, look, if you're coming into to this film expecting it to kind of be something like The Righteous Gemstones, where there's a bit of like an arc to the characters where you kind of get to know them and you sympathize with them a little bit, but they still like commit like, you know, questionable acts, but you still kind of like laugh at their absurdity. You're probably not going to get that here, because this is definitely more of a, well, a bit of a tragedy. It's, I mean, well, no, not even a bit of a tragedy. It gets downright depressing at times. In addition to being pretty damn funny, because, you know, it's a satire, and, you know, satires always run into that dark territory, because like satire's whole deal is like it has to condemn, and it's very clear what this film wants to condemn, and it doesn't make it like ambiguous by the end of the film what it's trying to say. So the story, and it's kind of like interesting how this film is shot, and I'll go into that in a bit, but the film is about this married couple of Trinity Childs and Lee Curtis Childs. Trinity is played by Regina Hall, and Lee Curtis is played by Sterling K. Brown, which they have immaculate performances here because they're expected to do a lot. They have to put on a show for the cameras. They also have to show like this desperation in their eyes, and they also kind of have to be these bitter people when the cameras are off as well. So both of them, just going to mention that right out of the gate, they have immaculate performances here. But the film starts off by showing off that they have like basically a mega church, and they used to have like a great following, and like, you know, they were a big beacon of like a religious community. But all that came to an end when Lee Curtis was accused of sexually molesting some teenage boys. And the film takes place after these allegations happen, and they try to have an out-of-court settlement. And after that happens, basically, we're watching them try to, like, pick up the pieces. And we watch this happen in kind of like a pseudo-mockumentary format. So, like, it's initially staged, like, we see, like, the news footage and stuff like that, and then we cut to, like, documentary footage, where they're basically like filming the Childs on their reopening of their church, and we see like, you know, them kind of like stagger around, like, you know, trying to like put on a smile, and every now and then, like, you know, they'll get gum on their shoe and curse a little bit, but they'll try to like keep up appearances for the camera. So we get that mockumentary from it, but it's not a mockumentary throughout the film. Like, there are parts of the film where it stops becoming a mockumentary, and we see what goes on when the cameras are off. And I love how it's staged too. Like, if you watch closely, you'll see there's a change in aspect ratios. So like when you have like kind of the 4:3 format, you're watching like the mockumentary, and then once you get the more like anamorphic screen of like 16:9, that's when the cameras are off. But even if you didn't have that, you could tell when the cameras are off, because they've essentially become different people. Like, Regina Hall and Sterling K. Brown are just, like, all smiles and fun for the cameras. They might, like, quietly bicker with each other, hoping the mics won't pick them up, but they mostly just keep up appearances. When the cameras are off, they're very bitter about keeping this act up. And you even when, like, they're still in front of, like, the film crew, you can see that Regina Hall's character is just, you know, she's struggling. She can't keep it together. She's got, like, this nervousness in her eyes of, like, fearing she's going to mess something up with Lee Curtis, or that she'll speak out of line or doom the church. She basically feels trapped in both, like, this relationship and this religion that she's built into. Like, they have competition, you know, barely anyone follows their church, and it's not looking good for the people who are going to be attending. Like, it just feels like this is the end of an empire, and Regina Hall is basically stuck here because she's stuck by this guy who essentially, like, the more you watch what unfolds, it becomes pretty clear that Sterling K. Brown did sexually molest these teenage boys, especially when it's like when it's revealed that he was trying to, like, his argument basically reverts to, I didn't do it, to well, you know, they were teenagers, so they knew better. So yeah, he's a scummy guy. You don't like him. And in a sense, you kind of almost, like, don't want to like Trinity because she's just going along with Lee Curtis. But she feels like she has no choice to. Because, like, at this point, it feels like she's in so deep that everyone is just going to see her as just being as despicable as Lee Curtis. So you get a lot of the humor, I think, comes from, like, definitely I love how like the humor is kind of like separated into like the documentary format, and then the darker stuff happens off the cameras. Because once it's in the mockumentary format, it's actually pretty funny, like how it's staged, like how they time the subtitles. Like at one point, some random person comes up to Lee Curtis and says, like, hey, I don't care about those allegations, man, but you made a difference in my life. You were the best person that gave me spiritual guidance. And then the credits will come on that say, this guy is serving in prison. So just perfect little timing like that. And it's like, it's very, like I said, very, very dark humor to let you know that, no, this ministry, this mega church is not going to survive. It's the twilight for this, for this church. And Regina Hall's character recognizes this, and you can sense that something's bubbling in her. Something's going to boil over, and she has to do something. Especially, I loved kind of like the drama that unfolds here, because the more that you learn about her, the more you realize there is no way out for her. Like, the community despises her. The other churches don't like her. Even worse is the exchange she has with her mother, who basically says, look, the Christian thing to do is just stay with your man and, I don't know, wait till he dies. That's all you can do. And she says this with like a smile. Like, it's just like, it's the most normal thing in the world to do, is to just endure this pain of just serving as basically Lee Curtis's support permanently, to the point where towards the end of the film, she's literally forced to dress up like a clown to promote his church. And it's just like, you get like a really sinking feeling, and you feel sorry for Trinity by the end. And it's not like a sorry nature and like she didn't know what she was doing. She obviously knew what she was doing, but she felt trapped. And there's no way out for her. Like, even by the point that you get to this great monologue with her, which is just like, if I remember correctly, like most of it was all like in kind of one shot here, where you just see her unload on Lee Curtis in front of the cameras, that she can't handle this, and just like, it's the worst thing ever. But at the same time, after that, it just goes back to keeping up appearances. Like, just, there's nothing she can do at that point. And I love how like the film concludes on that by never giving a satisfying conclusion. Because the thing is, a lot of these like religious grifters from like mega churches and stuff like that, even on the downslope, they'll still be there. They'll still hang around and stuff like that. And by the end of this film, even the Childs are still hanging around. They're still trying to hold out hope that their ministry will survive. Even though, based on everything that we've seen, it's not going to happen. And the film, and I know this is going to frustrate a lot of the audience too, but it ends on a very ambiguous note, where it doesn't provide a solid conclusion, and just kind of holds on this moment of Regina Hall's character realizing, I'm trapped, this is the life I live, and I have no idea, how much weight is going to come further on me if I stay in this megachurch. And it's just, it's some heavy stuff. It's like, but like I said, it's great satire in that way, because it is condemning, this kind of like mega church and religious zealotry. And I love the fact that it's not just like, like a contained, perception by Lee Curtis, who has this massive ego that thinks that if you make stuff like big and decadent in your church, like they'll come back to you. Even if you are being accused of sexual misconduct, they'll still come back to you, even though they won't. That ain't gonna happen. But I love the fact that between all this, we get like news footage. We hear a radio call-in show where some of like the people in this community are basically polarized on this issue. They either believe the allegations and think that Lee Curtis is a horrible human being, or they don't believe it, because they think that Lee Curtis is just trying to be silenced, and that the benefit that he does to the community and with his church far outweighs any of his criminal intent and stuff like that. So really kind of gross stuff, but stuff that would be believable in this context here. And just like a lot of like dry and wry humor that happens here, that's very cynical and insulting, where like the rival church run by the Sumters, who are played by Nicole Bahari and I'm trying to remember the actor's name. Confidence. I'm trying to, like, his full name is like a Ukina Ekazu. I'm butchering his name. I'm so sorry. But yeah, they do a great job playing this kind of like rival church that is basically swooping in and taking over everything that the Childs had built up, and the and it's just like it's funny because you're watching their downfall, but you're also cheering it on because yeah, this is a mega church that deserves to fall. It's run by an egotistical crazy person who's married to someone who wants to get out. So you're rooting for this downfall, and the fact that you don't quite get like the easy closure for this type of story just makes this satire work so well. That this was a real surprise of a film, especially for coming from like it's produced by Monkey Paw Studios, so Jordan Peele's company, but it is a directorial debut by Adama Ebo, who also wrote the screenplay here, and like for that directorial debut, it's astonishing. It is like it knows how to balance the humor and the darkness, and the satire is wickedly sharp here, that it's just such an effective film to both like laugh at and then kind of feel gross that people like this exist in the world, but then laugh again because you get to watch them have the downfall that they deserve. So so it's a very, very bitterly funny film, I guess is the best way to describe it. So yeah, Honk for Jesus should still be playing in theaters, but if it's not, it should be playing on Peacock right now. So, few options to see that there. Like I said, Peacock, well, rather Universal, is the only, to the best of my knowledge, they're the only studio still doing like day-and-day release for some films, for some of them. Because I know, like, if it's a really big film like Minions: The Rise of Gru, they're gonna hold off for like a few months. Like, I think it's on there now, and I don't know if they're gonna do it with Halloween Kills. They might, but I doubt they will. Because I know they want to get people back out into the theaters, like they did with Minions. They want the bigger box office. But I think kind of like they almost kind of like knew that, okay, this is an original production by a first-time director. It probably helped to have it, give it more coverage on a streaming service, which is good because then it makes the film easier to see. Like, I've always said that too. Like, if a film is released on like a streaming service, it's much easier to recommend because like if it's a smaller film, it's harder to recommend because like like it's only going to be in theaters for a limited time, and then there's that period you gotta wait between like streaming or home video, and you never know when that's gonna be. But if it's just streaming, you're just like, oh, it's on this service, you can go watch it right now. That's why it's so much harder to recommend smaller films that get into theaters, even though they should be, like I mentioned last week, or not last week, last stream rather. I mentioned a great documentary called Clay Dreams about Will Vinton, the kind of like almost like the I don't quite want to say like unspoken, but like lesser known animation marvel, like stuff with like like the PJs and what else do you do, like The Adventures of Mark Twain and all those like stop motion films, California Raisins, stuff like that. Great little film, but it's only in small art house theaters right now, so it's harder to recommend. Okay, let's get to the last film here, and it's not a good one. I'm gonna make this quick. I'm gonna rip off this Band-Aid really quick here. I think you know what I'm gonna say about this film. I think you know. It's a Disney remake. It's trying to replicate as much as the original film as possible. It's directed by Robert Zemeckis, who has not been hitting it out of the park recently. I'm pretty sure you know the deal. All right. So let me get the notes up here, and we will begin in 3, 2, 1. So Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio. I feel like we got to stress that too, because like we got another Pinocchio film coming out this year, stop motion film, I believe, from what's his name? I'm gonna have to start this again. Oh my goodness, sorry. I blanked out on his name. I completely. It's a great director too. It's just I haven't seen his work in a while. It's just. Oh my god, I feel so stupid for not remembering. Guillermo del Toro. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've seen his films. I knew it was coming. I knew that there was another Pinocchio film coming. Let me get that up here and we'll restart this. Okay, alright, here we go. We'll start again. So Disney's Pinocchio. Not the animated one. This is the live action one directed by Robert Zemeckis. And I feel like we gotta clarify that too. This is Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio. And I'm only stressing that because we have a Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio animated film coming out later this year, which looks far more fascinating and entertaining than this film. I mean, it might not be, but based on everything I've seen, it looks like a lot more fun. Because this version of Pinocchio, much like Disney's previous remakes of their, classic animated films, this is mostly a retread that doesn't really add much to the character of Pinocchio. And what it does add, it kind of diminishes what that story was about. So, I guess the best thing you could say about this film is that they made Pinocchio look uncannily like the animated version. So everyone who was complaining that, the 2019 remake of The Lion King didn't look like the animated version, those fears can be put to bed here. Yes, this Pinocchio looks like the Disney animated version. That being said, they also try to make the cat and the fish look too much like the Disney animated version. So we get these very uncannily looking cat and fish. Like, what were the names? Like Figaro and Cleo, I believe, was the fish. And it's bizarre. Like, I know why they did it, so that they could be more expressive and all that. And to some degree, yes, they are more expressive. But it's bizarre. Like, it takes you out of the film. And the thing is, I guess the other good thing to say is that Tom Hanks does a decent job as Geppetto. I mean, Tom Hanks is usually sweetest actor. He puts a lot of heart into everything he does, and he clearly does with Geppetto. He doesn't half-ass it here. He's trying to make the best of what he can with this role, and he's given some terrible lines to work with in this film, but he makes them work pretty well. They expect Geppetto to make a lot of clock jokes, and Hank sells them as best they could. I don't think any actor could make these lines incredibly funny, so Hanks is basically making lemonade out of lemons here. Now the story itself, I don't think I have to run through the story. It's pretty much just the same story as the 1940s original. Where it diverges, I think, is where it kind of ruins a bit of the story here. Is we focus a little bit too much on Stromboli. You might know Stromboli was the puppeteer who tried to force Pinocchio into showbiz. Now, while they do still have the same sequence of events that happens here, all the staging, Pinocchio goes on stage, he sings the song, "There Ain't No Strings on Me," he dances with the puppets, same puppet designs and all that. But while he's there, he ends up meeting this character, Fabiana, who is a former ballerina, and she's now a puppeteer and has dreams of kind of having her own, dancing career, despite the fact that she had an injury. And it feels like there's a whole other film being shoved into here with Fabiana. And not to mention, that would be fine if, it didn't undermine the message of what was being meant for with Stromboli. Because the whole deal with, Stromboli was to show off that, show business sucks. It sucks and it's going to chew you up and spit you out. But towards the end of the film, we come back to Fabian, and she says, "Oh yeah, they locked up Stromboli, and now I'm gonna lead my own troupe, and we're gonna have a puppet show, and Pinocchio, you get to be in my show. So show business is good. It's great." So it kind of undermines that message. Another aspect that undermines the message, and I'm sure some people pointed this out as well, is that on Pleasure Island, none of the kids are smoking cigars and drinking beer. It's just like the only vices they have are eating candy and breaking stuff. Like that's about all they do. And I guess like playing pool. Yeah, they drink root beer instead of beer, which kind of undermines it because like it's supposed to be like the dangers of letting vices get to you. And here the only vices of like and like there's another aspect of like growing up and like wanting to be more grown up, like causing destruction, like smoking cigars and drinking. There's a whole bigger theme there, and it's completely thrown away just so that this land of pleasure seems more appropriate for kids. So it's like yes, so it's all sugar based. So I'm sure like I'm almost surprised that they didn't make the big reveal that the kids don't turn into donkeys and just that all their teeth fall out and they get diabetes. Just because, I mean, like the whole deal is like they do nothing but consume candy. They go down like this huge, they sled down a candy mountain. They do nothing but drink root beer. Why not go, if you're gonna mix stuff up that much? Why not go the full route? And that's just it. Like I said, it takes a lot of the heft out of this story, especially since everything else just is kind of like on autopilot. There's not a lot of funny lines in there. Like I mean, you would think that adding characters like like Keegan-Michael Key to play Honest John, that he'd have some funny lines, but not really. He's mostly just going through the motions and making like tepid passive commentary between like scenes. You have Lorraine Bracco playing a weird seagull. I found it odd. Like you have some pretty accomplished actors here, and they're served up just like these kind of like nothing roles for them. Like you have Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing Jiminy Cricket, which I didn't even know until like how would you know? It's one of those things where it's like you cast someone to play the voice of Alvin and the Chipmunks. It's like it doesn't matter who plays them. If they put on the voice, it's just then it's there, whatever. I will say this though, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt does an okay Jiminy Cricket, but he really doesn't make the character his own. It's very much it's bizarre. It feels very much like Disney is trying to replicate the exact same film but shave off a lot of edges to make it more kid friendly and that parents won't complain so much about, even though the whole film, the original story, is about adolescence and what it means to grow up and like the dangers of growing up and all that. So it's just like I said, it feels like the original film but just takes out all the heft and the greater themes, and it just becomes a kind of boring adventure that's just like it's loaded with CGI because of course it's Robert Zemeckis. Zemeckis always has lots of visual effects going and interacting with actors and stuff like that, which don't get me wrong, he still does well. Like there's not a lot of scenes where you're like, I can't believe that these characters would be interacting here. It's definitely fairly smooth, but at the same time it's like it's you just question, you're just like, just why what are you adding here? What is making this Pinocchio different from the original version? Because that's been my biggest hang up with these Disney remakes. It's like, okay, are you just doing like a cover song here? Like what are you going to add to, like even cover songs put their own spin on stuff, like the good ones at least. So what are you adding to this? What are you giving the story that wasn't there before? And most of what they give it just kind of like changes, like, and I not quite like change it, but it undermines what that story is trying to be. And that would be okay if there was a different theme that was trying to be stressed here, but it's not. It's mostly just like the same stuff. It's the same central theme about wanting to grow up and all that, and it does not work. It's just it's one of those things where it's just like it feels like there was very much like a tunnel vision of, you know, how can we make a live action film look as close to the animated Pinocchio as possible, which, yeah, this is close, but why though? Like, I mean, obviously I know why Disney did this, because they wanted money, although probably because it tested poorly, they didn't want to push it into theaters, so might have misfired there. So yeah, there's a reason why they forced it on Disney Plus, not just because of Disney Plus Day. I gotta imagine like this did not test well, because it's been getting terrible reviews and all that, and you know, who could blame them? You know, nothing about this film works. That this is definitely one of the worst Disney remakes, just because it's just soulless. There's nothing of value here that changes up the Pinocchio story or expands on like the themes there, because like that's the best thing I think you could do with a Disney remake like this is expand on it. What new and interesting stuff could you do with that Pinocchio story that wasn't in the previous film? Like, could you expand some more on Pleasure Island? Could you show more of the darkness of showbiz? Like maybe show like another puppet or an actor who is like really beaten down by it, not just having like Fabiana with like her injury and recovers easily. Like the original Pinocchio film had like a lot of darkness that you could have leaned into more, and it would have been great, because like Zemeckis's films, like if you've seen like, you know, like A Christmas Story and all that, his films do not shy away from darkness. So you almost kind of like what happened here? Where's that darker edge? I miss that darker edge of Zemeckis filmmaking. So, yeah, it's such a soulless film. So Pinocchio is currently playing on Disney Plus and hasn't been in theaters. So be sure, though, to check out Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which I see here has been listed as the 2022 animated version, to make it distinct. Let's see. It should be coming out. They're actually going to be bringing this one to theaters, which basically means one thing. If it's coming to theaters in November, it means one thing for Netflix. They're looking at Oscars. This is probably going to be nominated for an Academy Award. It's looking like, because it's going to go to theaters in November, and then it's going to stream in December, I believe. Yeah, early December. So yeah, it's looking like they're trying to push this for award season. Yeah, and I hope it does go to like to the Academy Awards, because it's definitely, I will say this, it's probably, depending on the reaction, it's probably not going to win. It's probably going to be Disney's Turning Red. Worst case scenario, it'll probably be Lightyear, but yeah, it's probably going to be Turning Red that's going to win the Academy Award, which is a good thing. Like, definitely, Turning Red is one of my favorite films of the year, but I'll have to see how it stacks up to Pinocchio, which I'm greatly looking forward to, actually. Alrighty. Well, I am almost to basically like put that person who thinks they understand every horror film immediately with the first 20 minutes in their place. It's a very unexpected horror film. Go see it. It's already in theaters. I reviewed Pearl, which is coming out this weekend. It should be in theaters tomorrow night. It is the prequel to X, and it's a blast, a great character study of a woman's dreams dashed, and then she puts on a dress and kills people with axes and feeds them to gators. It's a lot of fun. Clerks III is a heartfelt bit of nostalgia, a bit of a greatest hits with Kevin Smith. If you love Clerks, you're definitely going to have a lot of emotion and nostalgia for how this film ends. But if you're not big into Clerks and you mostly come into it for the jokes, you're probably not going to get a lot out of this film. So, a bit torn. Playing in theaters this week in a festival format. I'm not sure if it'll have a wider release. We'll have to see. Reviewed Honk For Jesus, Save Your Soul. Brilliant, dark satire. Just be willing for it to go to some uncomfortable places. Like, if you like your comedy just pitch black and bitter, like your coffee, it's a great film. And we reviewed Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio, which is a soulless remake that doesn't add anything all that engaging, and what it does add kind of diminishes the greater story. So there you go. Those are our movie reviews for this week. My name is Mark McPherson. I write for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. You can check out all my reviews there. I believe I just posted the review of Pearl up there on movieswithmark.com right now. And I'll be getting reviews out of a lot of the stuff that I've talked about here onto the other websites soon. So, we will see you again in October, I believe, and we will have a lot more films to talk about then. Especially because, like, we're just now getting, like, the tricklings of, like, festival films that are coming out now. So stuff like Don't Worry, Darling, and what else? Stuff like the Forerunner, the Frontrunner, I think. The Steven Spielberg film was coming out. I'm hoping at some point we'll get a release of, if you have not heard of it, there's a film that was taken out of competition at Tribeca called The People's Joker, which is an unofficial DC Comics film about a transgender Joker and her origin story. And I've seen the trailer for it, and from what I've heard about it, it sounds absolutely bonkers and gonzo. And apparently it screened once, and then it was taken out of competition. And I don't know if it's going to be picked up by anybody. So it'll be interesting to see if that film gets released, because it sounds just bizarre enough that I want to check it out. So yeah, there's and then of course, you know, we're gonna get a few more horror films. We got a new Halloween Ends coming up this October. We've got more comic book movies, of course, will never stop coming. So we got Black Adam coming up, whole bunch of different films coming up, and then of course when we get, it's fall, so we're gonna get it more into the award season by November. And then by December, of course, we'll get the big commercial films that we expect, with stuff like, what's coming out? A little film called Avatar 2. So we'll see how that film does. So be sure to check out all the sites that I listed here for more of my movie reviews. I'll get these reviews posted by sometime next week. These video reviews, obviously. And yeah, I will catch you next time. So I'll give you a little bit of a Mega Force kiss goodbye.